At 6:30 on the morning of April 12, 2002, 34-year-old Marcus Reynolds stood on the porch of his mountain cabin in Boulder, Colorado, watching the sunrise, unaware that 48 hours later, his name would appear in international missing persons reports. 10 years later, his body would be discovered in an icy tomb at 2,700 feet, with bound hands and a crushed skull. A murder that would shock the global scientific community and expose disturbing secrets buried in the alpine ice. My brother was special, methodical to the last detail, says Diane Reynolds, going through Marcus's personal effects in the Denver Police Department's archive room. He was called the Barometer Man. He could sense weather changes before any instrument. Marcus never made a mistake in the mountains. A graduate of the University of Colorado with degrees in environmental science and photojournalism, Reynolds was known for his publications in National Geographic and the Sierra Club on the effects of climate change on mountain ecosystems. His most recent project, Melting Eternity, documented the disappearing glaciers of 4 continents. Marcus would load his North Face backpack into the trunk of a rented Jeep Wrangler, methodically checking the gear list in his tattered moleskin notebook, recalls Jason Harris, Reynolds' neighbor and friend, the last person to see him in America. He was focused, but visibly agitated, not the way he usually was before expeditions. Reynolds' diary entries 3 days before departure show growing anxiety. Received a strange email reply from Professor K regarding my request for data from the Wronski Glacier. Said that some archival material is not publicly available and potentially discredits recognized research. What does that mean? I've spent 5 years photographing glacier melt around the world, but Mer de Glace has struck me the most. It's where I need to get the perfect footage to complete my project, he wrote in his last email to the editor of National Geographic, sent at 4:15 in the morning on the day of his departure. In the same email, a line below, "There is something else I want to check out. We may have encountered a systematic falsification of melting rate data. Details when we meet." The list of equipment found by investigators included, in addition to standard photographic equipment, vernier pocket spectrometer for analyzing glacial samples, UV filter for identifying chemical traces in snow deposits, and University of Bern Secret Archive photocopies, items circled twice in red marker. His sister Diana recalls, "Marcus called me at 7:30 in the morning before he left. He was excited, talking about strange information he had discovered in the university archives about the rate of glacial melt, something he said could change the whole understanding of climate change." A recording of this conversation, saved by Diana on a digital answering machine, breaks off at Marcus's words, "Someone is deliberately tampering. But who benefits?" Detective Robert Clark of the Colorado Special Investigations Division notes, "In his computer, we found an encrypted folder called Wronski Anomalies that was not deciphered until the year 2013. It contained comparative tables of glacial melting data labeled official versus real, and the name Whitaker with 3 question marks. On the kitchen table of his mountain cabin in Boulder, Colorado, remained an unfinished coffee in a Yeti thermos mug and an unfolded atlas with a marked route over St. Gothard Pass to the Wronski Glacier in the canton of Valais. Nearby was a printout of an electronic ticket for United Airlines flight UA 8857, Denver-Zurich, and a note to myself. Check for variations in glaciological core readings from the eastern slope. Avoid official monitoring routes. Document everything. Trust no one. Climate science professor David Jensen of Stanford University, who who reviewed Reynolds' materials after his disappearance, comments, "Marcus was more than just a photographer. He was conducting a serious scientific investigation. From his notes, he suspected that published data on the rate of glacial melt had been deliberately distorted to serve certain corporate interests." The last person to have contact with Reynolds on U.S. soil was Denver airport employee Michelle Gonzalez. He seemed wary, constantly looking around. When I was checking his luggage, he said a strange phrase. "If anything happens, it's all in my home safe. The code is Diana's birthday." According to Swiss immigration records, Reynolds arrived in Zurich at 8:45 on the morning of April 13th. A security camera in the airport parking lot captured him loading equipment into a rented SUV and then studying something on the screen of his Dell laptop for a long time. That evening, I received a final WhatsApp message from him with the coordinates of his camp and a photo of a sunset over the Alps with the caption, "Someone else camped nearby. I see glimpses of a flashlight on a nearby slope. Strange that someone else is here at this time of year," Diana later told investigators, showing a screenshot of the message. The photo's geolocation confirmed his presence 4 kilometers from the top of Furka Pass. The last entry in his weather journal read, "Sunto barometer shows an unexpected drop in pressure. Storm possible. But skies clear. I'll get up at 4:30 tomorrow to shoot first light on the glacier. With any luck, I'll get material for the final chapter." The journal was found in his tent, the last stroke of the pen indicating haste or nervous excitement. In the video he shot that evening, later retrieved from the SD card of his Canon EOS 1D Mark II camera, Marcus looks directly into the lens and says with unusual seriousness, "If you're watching this, it means I found what I was looking for. Or, it found me." The last 7 seconds of the recording captures the barely audible sound of snow crunching outside the frame, and the sharp turn of Reynolds' head to the left before the image cuts off. Spectral analysis of the audio track, conducted by an FBI lab in 2014, reveals a second male voice in the background, speaking a phrase in lightly accented English. "It's time to end this game, Marcus. Some glaciers must keep their secrets." There are no witnesses to the events that follow. Only the silent Alps became mute witnesses to what happened at an altitude of 2,700 meters above sea level in the pre-dawn hours of April 14th, 2002. On April 13th, 2002, at 16:45 CET, the control room of the Mountain Rescue Service of the Canton of Uri received an alarm call. In a steady but tense voice, the receptionist of the Alpenhof Hotel in Andermatt, Gertrude Weber, reported, "The American guest, photographer Marcus Reynolds, has not returned by the agreed deadline and has not answered his phone for 8 hours. His Iridium satellite phone has been unavailable since 4 in the morning." The weather in the Swiss Alps that day was perfect. Clear skies, visibility up to 30 kilometers, the temperature at an altitude of 2,700 meters was about 3 degrees Celsius. Ideal conditions for a photo shoot, and absolutely not disposed to accidents. The hotel management gave us the exact coordinates of the place where Reynolds planned to set up camp, recalls Ulrich Baumann, head of the mountain rescue team, when interviewed for a Discovery Channel documentary in 2017. "We picked up a Eurocopter EC-135 helicopter at 17:20 and located the tent exactly at the specified location. At 17:50, the first search team of 4 rescuers and a kynologist with a border collie dog named Alta reached Reynolds' camp. What they saw was perplexing from the first moments, even to experienced alpine rescuers. The bright red mountain hardware tent was neatly buttoned from the inside, which in itself is atypical for a spontaneous abandonment scenario," noted an official Swiss police report dated April 13, 2002. Inside were a Western mountaineering sleeping bag, unfolded and ready for use. 4 days' worth of provisions, including Cliff Bar energy bars, Mountain House freeze-dried lunches, and a Stanley thermos of still warm coffee. Reynolds' personal belongings, passport, wallet with 300 Swiss francs, credit cards, and personal diary, lay neatly folded in a sea-to-summit waterproof bag in a corner of the tent. The satellite phone was missing. It was as if he had gone out for a 1-minute photo shoot and had to return immediately, Ulrich Baumann noted in the report. There was a pot of water on the MSR portable gas burner that had completely boiled away, and his beloved Canon camera was lying on a boulder 20 meters from camp, pointed at the glacier. The camera was on, the battery almost dead, as if it had been running for hours. Rescuer Marcus Hofer, who first inspected the tent, noticed a strange detail. The snow around the tent was completely untouched, except for one single chain of footprints leading to the boulder with the camera. There were no return tracks to the tent. It was as if the man had just disappeared. In the weather log Reynolds methodically kept, the last entry was made at 4:25 a.m. Cloud cover 0%. Wind southeast, 2 meters per second. Temperature -2. Sunrise in 18 minutes. Perfect light. No signs of anxiety or haste were given off by the handwriting. By 1930, an extended search team arrived on the scene with thermal imagers, additional dogs, and climbing gear. The area within a 500-meter radius was thoroughly searched, but no trace of Reynolds could be found. The weirdness started when we widened the search area, says Heidi Zimmerman, a dog handler. My dog Alta suddenly changed behavior abruptly about 2 kilometers northeast of the camp on the edge of the glacier. She had clearly picked up the trail but was behaving unusually, whining and refusing to follow the trail, which is unusual for a trained search and rescue dog. 3 kilometers from the main camp, near the edge of a glacial crevasse about 2 meters wide, search dogs found Reynolds' backpack hanging from a rock ledge, in a position that would later be described in reports as physically inexplicable. The 70-liter Osprey backpack was secured to a narrow rock ledge about 4 meters from the edge of the glacial crevasse and 6 meters above the bottom of the crevasse, said the report by Peter Klein, a technical expert with the Swiss Alpine Club. This defied all logic and the laws of physics, as if someone had deliberately suspended it where neither the wind nor the fall could place it. This positioning required some delicate work with climbing gear. Inside the backpack were a spare Nikon 70 to 200 mm lens, a Dell laptop in a waterproof case, a notebook sealed in plastic and labeled "Anomalies of the Wronski Glacier, do not open." 18 tubes of ice samples numbered and dated, and a Kingston flash drive in a metal shock-proof container. When we discovered the backpack, it was obvious that we were not dealing with an ordinary accident. Cantonal Police Detective Eric Muller said at a press briefing on April 14th. The placement of the objects was too deliberate. The massive search operation involving 3 helicopters, thermal imaging cameras, GPR to survey glacial crevasses, and more than 50 rescuers lasted 14 days but was inconclusive, despite ideal weather conditions and excellent visibility. More than 30 square kilometers of mountain terrain were surveyed, including all accessible glacial crevasses within a 5-kilometer radius of the camp. We use state-of-the-art search technology, recalls the coordinator of the rescue operation, Colonel André Dubois. FLIR thermal imaging cameras capable of detecting human body heat even under a 50-centimeter layer of snow. DJI drones with high-sensitivity cameras. GPR to scan the glacial crevasses. Nothing. It was as if the man had vanished into the mountain air. After 2 months of intensive search, which cost the Swiss authorities the sum of about 450,000 francs. The operation was officially closed. On July 5, 2002, the police of the canton of Uri issued an official conclusion. The evidence available to us leads us to conclude that U.S. citizen Marcus Reynolds was probably the victim of an accident in the mountains. Cantonal Police spokeswoman Sylvia Berger dryly reported at the latest briefing on the case. We speculate that he may have fallen into one of the many glacial crevices and his body was buried under snow or ice. Such cases are unfortunately not uncommon in the Alps, even among experienced climbers. An official certificate of presumed death was issued by Colorado authorities to the Reynolds family in September of that year. The case was closed and moved to the archive of unsolved accidents. Marcus's family, however, adamantly refused to accept the official version. His sister Diane, looking through numerous photos of her brother from his expeditions, drew attention to Marcus's impeccable safety discipline. Anyone who knew my brother will tell you, he was maniacally careful in the mountains, Diane Reynolds said at a press conference she organized in Denver on July 22, 2002. Marcus always used a safety rope when approaching the edge of any crevasse. Always. No exceptions. In an interview with CNN, a month after the case was officially closed, Diane didn't hide her emotions. My brother was a certified mountaineering instructor, took Navy SEAL survival and glacier rescue courses. This was no accident. Someone knew he was going to be there and was waiting for him. Look at the backpack. How could it have gotten there? It's physically impossible without the intervention of another person. Reynolds' friends and colleagues organized a petition demanding a further investigation, gathering more than 80,000 signatures. But the official position of the authorities remained unchanged. We understand the family's pain and their unwillingness to accept reality, commented Josef Steiner, head of the investigative department of the Uri Canton, commenting on the decision not to resume the search. But we have no evidence of the criminal nature of Mr. Reynolds' disappearance. So the case of Marcus Reynolds hit the shelves of the archives, becoming another tragic story of a man swallowed by the silent mountains. But 10 years later, the silence of the glaciers will be broken by a discovery that will shock not only the family of the missing photographer, but also the entire world scientific community. Glaciers keep their secrets for decades. They absorb, preserve, and slowly transform everything that falls into their icy embrace. On June 23, 2012, as the hands of the clock read 11:20 in the morning, a multi-ton mass of ice on the south slope of the Wronski Glacier reluctantly revealed a secret it had kept for 10 years. The day was exceptionally clear, the temperature about 15 degrees, unusually warm for June at this altitude. Recalled Kurt Schneider, a 42-year-old mountaineer from Munich who was descending the eastern route with his wife Hannah and friend Thomas Weiss. We noticed a strange red spot 30 meters down the slope. At first we thought someone had lost their gear. As the group approached, they found the partially melted sleeve of a tattered red Gore-Tex jacket, contrasting against the bluish ice surface. Thomas Weiss, an emergency physician from Berlin, was the first to realize that they had discovered something much more disturbing. I noticed a characteristic anatomical curve under the fabric, he told investigators later. Immediately activated the emergency signal on our Spot satellite tracker and called the rescue service. An Air Zermatt helicopter arrived on scene 28 minutes later. A task force consisting of 2 rescuers and a police officer began the inspection. During the initial clearing of the ice, it became apparent that it was human remains frozen into the glacier. We used a special melting technique using thermal blankets and infrared heaters to carefully extract the body. Jean-Luc Morel, the rescue team leader, describes the process. By 16 o'clock, it was possible to free the body up to the shoulders, and it was clear to us that we were dealing with a criminal case. At 17:45, a full forensic team from Bern arrived on the scene. Extraction of the body was completed at 23:30. Forensic medical examiner Dr. Klaus Hoffmann, who specializes in alpine accidents, personally supervised the process and recorded details on site. When we completely removed the body, it became obvious that this was no ordinary accident, his official report said. The skull had multiple depressed fractures, inconsistent with a fall or ice compression. The nature of the injuries indicated blunt force trauma with a limited contact surface. The victim's hands were tied behind his back with a 9mm diameter mammoth climbing rope, using a special climbing knot, 8/8. A preliminary inspection at the site allowed experts to reach a shocking conclusion. The body was in an ice cavity rather than completely frozen into the ice, an atypical situation for glacier victims. This observation later became important in understanding the circumstances of the murder. The body was preserved in a state close to natural mummification, Dr. Hoffmann notes in the report. The low temperatures and dry air in the cavity created conditions for slow decomposition. This allowed many pieces of evidence to be preserved in exceptionally good condition. 48 hours after the discovery, DNA testing confirmed the identity of the deceased, Marcus Reynolds, an American photographer who disappeared in the area 10 years ago. Almost all of his clothes were still on his body: a red Gore-Tex expedition jacket, a Patagonia fleece jacket, Helly Hansen thermal underwear, and La Sportiva mountaineering boots. In the pockets were found Swiss Army knife Victorinox, spare batteries for the camera, Energy Bar Cliff Bar with expired in 2002 years, and a scrap of paper with handwritten coordinates of some point on the glacier. Forensic analysis determined that death was caused by blows from a heavy est-wing geologic hammer, fragments of which were found frozen in the ice near the body. Metal analysis showed that the tool was relatively new at the time of the murder, and a serial number made it possible to trace its sale at a specialty store in Bern 3 days before Reynolds' disappearance. The most disturbing discovery was that the body was in a so-called dry cavity in the glacier, a natural pocket between layers of ice, explained guest expert glaciologist Dr. André Zimmermann of the Federal Polytechnic School of Zurich, who was involved in the investigation of the discovery site. Such cavities are extremely rare and take decades to form. Their location is only well known to specialists. It is impossible to get into this particular cavity by accident. Only if someone familiar with the structure of glaciers deliberately placed the body there. A chain with a SanDisk flash drive in a waterproof container was found around the victim's neck. FBI technical experts were able to recover the data, which included photos taken of Reynolds in the last hours of his life. One of the photos, taken at 4:37 in the morning on the day of disappearance, shows a silhouette of a man against the pre-dawn sky. The face cannot be discerned, but experts in anthropometry have determined the approximate height, about 185 centimeters, and an athletic build. Another photo shows a fuzzy inscription on the snow, which FBI experts after digital processing deciphered as, "This is not your discovery." Given the position of the body and the nature of the injuries, we can reconstruct the sequence of events. Detective Michael Berger of the Valais Canton Homicide Unit said at a press conference on June 28, 2012. Reynolds was attacked at dawn while photographing a glacier. His attacker struck him at least 7 times in the head, then tied up the already probably dead victim, and transported the body about 2 kilometers to the ice cavity. This required specific knowledge of the terrain and considerable physical strength. The investigation went beyond analyzing physical evidence. A Dell laptop retrieved from Reynolds' backpack back in 2002 and stored in police archives was able to recover the search history and documents the photographer was working on. We recovered the search history from the victim's laptop, and it appears that Reynolds had stumbled upon something significant in his glacier research, Detective Berger confirmed. He carefully analyzed data that contradicted accepted scientific conclusions about the rate of glacial melt in the region, especially those published by a team of scientists led by Professor Gordon Whitaker of the University of Colorado. Further investigation uncovered encrypted files with tables comparing official measurements of glacier melt rates with Reynolds' own data. The discrepancies were as high as 30%. My brother was talking about strange discrepancies in the university's historical records about the Ron Glacier, Diane Reynolds recalled during a press conference to reopen the investigation. He claimed that some data had been deliberately altered in academic publications from the year 2001. He believed that such manipulations could have distorted global understanding of climate processes and affected the distribution of millions of dollars worth of research grants. On July 1, 2012, the Marcus Reynolds case was officially reclassified from accident to murder. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation joined in, given the victim's nationality and potential connection to academia in America. We are dealing with a premeditated murder carefully disguised as an accident in the mountains, FBI Special Agent in Charge John McKenzie concluded in a joint briefing. The perpetrator had specific knowledge of glaciology, mountaineering, and glacier anatomy. This narrows the suspect pool considerably. After a decade of silence, the ice finally spoke, and its message was grim. Scientific truth sometimes hides secrets that people are willing to kill for. At 10 hours and 17 minutes on September 3, 2012, a telephone call interrupted the measured rhythm of the FBI's Denver office. On the line was a man with a noticeable German accent who refused to identify himself. In the answering department, such anonymous messages are usually filtered by the dozens, but the words glacier, photographer, and professor instantly caught the operator's attention. The recording of that call lasts 7 minutes and 23 seconds, says Special Agent Rebecca Morgan, the first to listen to the tape. The caller spoke softly, as if he was afraid to be heard. He said he had been silent for 10 years out of fear, but finding the body made him talk. The anonymous source claimed that shortly before Reynolds' disappearance, while working as a mountain guide, he had accompanied the American professor to a point 2 kilometers from the future site of the tragedy. The caller provided details known only to those who had actually been in the area. A description of an unusual rock formation resembling an eagle's beak, and a little-noticed trail not marked on hiking maps. For the first 48 hours, we worked to identify the caller, recalls Agent James Harrison, the lead investigator on the Reynolds case. From the accent, linguists determined an origin from the Bavaria region and a mention of a specific mountain hut called Hoher Kasten in the canton of Uri narrowed the search. Through Swiss colleagues, it was possible to identify the caller, 60-year-old Heinrich Müller, a former mountain guide living in the suburbs of Munich. At first contact, Müller refused to cooperate, citing threats received in 2002. Only after receiving assurances of protection and anonymity did he agree to a full interrogation, the FBI report noted. Held in a secure location on the grounds of the American consulate in Munich on September 12th, the interrogation lasted 8 hours and was fully videotaped. I escorted him to the glacier a week before the incident, Heinrich Müller testified, sitting behind a metal desk in a half-empty room at the consulate. His wrinkled hands, accustomed to the alpine cold, nervously fumbled with the worn lace of his glasses. He introduced himself as a professor from America studying glaciers. But he asked strange questions, not about the beauty of nature, but about the exact location of crevasses, the places where ice caves might hide things that shouldn't be found. He was particularly interested in the glacier cavities that are known only to locals. Mueller described the client's appearance in detail: tall, about 185 centimeters, athletic build, with graying temples and a scar above his right eyebrow. The guide paid special attention to the unusual behavior of the American. He was photographing not scenic vistas, but topographical landmarks, making notes in a leather notebook with gold-embossed University of Colorado, Mueller recalled. When I casually mentioned another American photographing glaciers in the same area, he changed dramatically in his face and began asking for details. Mueller's testimony launched an intense investigation. The FBI's analytical division matched the description to a database of U.S. university personnel specializing in glaciology. Of the 27 candidates, 5 matched the physical description, and only 1 had a connection to the University of Colorado. Geology professor Gordon Whitaker, a 56-year-old internationally renowned expert in the study of glaciers. A review of immigration records obtained at the FBI's request revealed a shocking detail. Whitaker had entered Switzerland on April 11, 2002, the day before Reynolds arrived, and flew back to the United States on April 14, spending only 68 hours in the country. That fact alone would not have been suspicious, Agent Harrison explains at a press briefing on September 18. But the professor never mentioned his stay in Switzerland during that time. Moreover, according to his official lecture schedule, he was supposed to be at a conference in Boston. A check of Whitaker's financial activity uncovered even more disturbing details. A week before the trip, he withdrew $12,000 in cash from his Wells Fargo account, citing field research as the reason. A credit card transaction tracker showed that he had rented a Jeep Compass at the Zurich airport and purchased climbing equipment at the Beckley Berg Sports store in Bern. Among the purchases was an Estwing geological hammer worth 86 Swiss francs, Agent Harrison emphasized. The same model, fragments of which were found at Reynolds' body. On September 22, 2012, a federal court in Denver issued a search warrant for Gordon Whitaker's home in the upscale Boulder neighborhood. A task force of 8 agents arrived at 6 in the morning, taking the suspect, who was returning from a morning jog, by surprise. The house was organized with pedantic neatness, recalled crime scene technician Alicia Rodriguez. Every item in its place, books arranged alphabetically, the mineral collection cataloged. But this orderliness contrasted with the chaotic basement where boxes of expedition gear were stored. A thorough search that lasted 14 hours revealed a cache behind a false panel in the basement. Clad in soundproofing material, the alcove contained several items that instantly elevated Whitaker's status from witness to prime suspect. We found Reynolds' research diary in a waterproof package with his name and dates of expeditions. Rodriguez lists the finds. A SanDisk flash drive labeled Anomalies P2002 was stored in a metal capsule. But the most disturbing find was a collection of 13 Victorinox Swiss Army knives with initials carved into the handles. When checked against a database of missing persons, it turned out that 2 of the knives belonged to tourists who disappeared in America's national parks. Jeremy Coleman, who disappeared in Yellowstone in 1999, and Brian Hope, who disappeared in Glacier Park in 2001. A special FBI digital forensics team led by David Chen worked for 3 days to decrypt the data from the flash drive. The discovered files turned out to be encrypted using a complex algorithm. When we decrypted the data from the flash drive, it became clear that Reynolds had discovered tampering with the results of a glacial melting study conducted by Whittaker in 1999. Chen explained at a closed briefing for the investigative team. The manipulation of the data was subtle but undeniable. Reynolds created comparative tables showing the discrepancies between Whittaker's official publications and the original field records he was able to obtain from the archives. According to the analysis report, the discovery of such falsification could not only ruin Whittaker's scientific reputation, but also deprive him of a $4,200,000 National Science Foundation grant to continue his research. During interrogations of Whittaker's colleagues and students, a psychological profile of a scientist obsessed with his work to a pathological degree began to emerge. A former student of the professor, whose name was withheld at his request, provided investigators with a tape recording of a lecture from the year 2001. The professor was obsessed with the idea that some secrets should remain buried in the ice. Whittaker's voice can be heard on the recording. Glaciers hold secrets that can destroy quarries. Some explorers dig too much where they shouldn't. Science requires caution and selectivity in publishing results. By the end of September 2012, the investigation had gathered enough evidence to indict. An arrest warrant for Gordon Whittaker was signed by federal judge Robert Kingsley on October 1st. The geology professor, whose work had been cited in thousands of scientific publications around the world, had become the prime suspect in a murder case he had disguised almost perfectly as a disappearance in the mountains. Almost. Chapter 5. The Final Frame. The pre-dawn hour in the mountains of Colorado. The 7th of October, 2012. 5:30 in the morning. 16 FBI agents in tactical gear silently take up positions around a secluded chalet in the Rocky Mountains. Inside, according to 3 days of surveillance, is Professor Gordon Whittaker, packing gear for another expedition to Alaska. "We chose early morning for a reason," recalls FBI Special Agent Robert McKenzie, who led the operation, leafing through notes in a worn moleskin notebook, the same kind Reynolds used. Whittaker's psychological profile indicated he was methodical. Every morning at 5:15, he would go out on the terrace with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. We wanted to catch him in a moment of habitual routine. The tactical team used Bose acoustic sensors to record movements inside the house. At 5:14, a sensor on the terrace went off. 60 seconds later, the command, Alpha 1, go. When apprehended, Whittaker offered no resistance. Agent Emily Donovan, who first handcuffed the suspect, notes in the official report. He stood clutching a mug with the University of Colorado logo on it and calmly watched us surround the house. When I read him his driver's license, he only nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment for 10 years. A search of the suburban home turned up packed backpacks with climbing gear, flight tickets to Anchorage, and detailed maps of remote Alaskan glaciers with marked points. Among the documents, investigators found files on 2 local guides and their tour schedules. When arrested, Whittaker remained frighteningly calm, his only reaction being an odd phrase. "Glaciers always give back what doesn't belong to them, but they never reveal the whole truth," McKenzie recalls. Those words, spoken with an almost academic detachment, made me shudder. I realized that we had apprehended not just a murderer, but a man with a deeply distorted philosophy. FBI psychologist Dr. Rachel Coleman, who was present during the initial interrogation, noted Whittaker's unusual behavior. The professor exhibited a rare form of narcissistic disorder, expressed in a complete lack of emotional response to the evidence presented. He perceived the Reynolds murder not as a crime, but as an inevitable consequence of the disruption of some natural order in science. Within 3 months of his arrest, An investigative team of 34 specialists was gathering evidence for the trial. 8 investigative experiments were conducted on glaciers, identical in structure to Wronski's, to recreate the murder and body concealment scenario. The trial, which began on January 23, 2013, in federal court in Denver, attracted unprecedented worldwide media attention. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with additional screens set up in neighboring rooms for broadcast. This case goes far beyond ordinary murder, federal prosecutor Sarah Jenkins said in her opening statement. It is an attack on the very essence of the scientific method, on the sanctity of the search for truth. Professor Whitaker didn't just kill a man, he tried to kill the facts. During the trial, the jury heard testimony from 46 witnesses. Among them were the world's leading glaciologists who corroborated Reynolds' analysis of the manipulation of glacier melt data. Professor Hans Jorgensen of the University of Oslo, who examined the original Whitaker and Reynolds records, presented shocking findings to the court. Whitaker's falsification of data was systematic and deliberate. He underestimated the rate of glacial melt in his publications by 27%, creating the illusion of slower climate change. This is not just academic inaccuracy, it is scientific fraud with far-reaching consequences. FBI financial analyst Jeffrey Lim revealed the material motives behind the crime. Whitaker's distorted data was used by several oil companies to lobby for more lenient environmental standards. Over a 10-year period, the professor received contracts totaling more than $7 million through various research foundations. The money came through a complex network of grants and private research fellowships. Diane Reynolds, who testified on the 5th day of the trial, brought to court her brother's latest unpublished photo album with commentary on the glacier shots. Marcus was not an activist, she said, holding back emotion. He was a photographer and a scientist who believed in the integrity of the data. His last diary entry read, "Science without truth is not science, but ideology." A psychiatric evaluation found Whitaker sane, capable of realizing the nature of his actions. The defendant exhibits classic signs of malignant narcissism with elements of a messianic complex, concluded Dr. Alan Parker, a leading forensic psychiatrist. He genuinely believed in his right to determine which scientific facts were worthy of publication and which were not. In his worldview, Reynolds committed not just a professional error, but an almost religious sacrilege by exposing the manipulation of data. On March 12, 2013, after 27 days of deliberations, the jury retired to reach a verdict. 8 hours and 12 minutes of deliberation behind closed doors, court reporter Melissa Green recalled. There was such silence in the room that you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The verdict was reached after 8 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder and concealing evidence. Federal prosecutor Sarah Jenkins said at a press conference after the trial concluded, "Justice has been served, albeit a decade late." Judge Michael Harrington announced the sentence, life in prison without parole, on March 14th. Before the reading, Whitaker was allowed to have the last word. His statement lasted only 3 minutes and 42 seconds, says bailiff Thomas Rodriguez. But during that time, the temperature in the auditorium seemed to drop several degrees. He sounded like a lecturer, explaining obvious things to uncomprehending students. Despite the harsh sentence, Whitaker refused to reveal the whereabouts of the bodies of 2 other alleged victims, hikers who disappeared in national parks and whose Victorinox Swiss Army knives were found in his stash. "Nature is the best keeper of secrets. I only helped her with this one," he said in his final statement. Some things must remain buried under the ice. The Reynolds-Whittaker case has sparked an international debate about ethics in the scientific community. Leading scientific journals have tightened publication requirements for climate research data, introducing a multi-stage verification system. The Wronski Glacier, the site of the tragedy, is today marked by an inconspicuous memorial stone of local granite with the carved words of Marcus Reynolds. Truth, like light, will always find its way through the ice. The site has become a pilgrimage of sorts for environmentalists and climate researchers who continue the work of the deceased photographer. 10 years later, science has confirmed my brother's discovery about the manipulation of glacier melt data, says Diane Reynolds, who founded the Marcus Foundation to support honest climate change research. His work saved the reputation of the environmental movement from fakes that could have discredited decades of research. The cost was prohibitive, but the truth prevailed. The Marcus Reynolds Foundation annually awards fellowships to young photographers and researchers studying climate change. In its 7 years of existence, the program has supported 64 projects in 18 countries around the world. The paradoxical epilogue to this story is a phenomenon noticed by alpine guides and confirmed by scientists at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. When visitors pass the very spot on the glacier where Marcus was found, many report an inexplicable phenomenon. Even on the hottest days, this patch of ice remains solid, impervious to global warming, like a frozen memory of a man who gave his life for scientific truth. Dr. Sylvia Berger, lead glaciologist at the Institute, attributes the phenomenon to the special properties of the ice at this location, but adds, "There is always room for mystery in science." Marcus Reynolds reminded us of that with his life and his death. And in a maximum security cell at ADX Florence Prison in Colorado, Gordon Whittaker continues work on a memoir that, under the terms of his incarceration, cannot be published during his lifetime. In the only authorized photograph from the prison, the professor is captured with the same detached half-smile with which he met FBI agents at dawn on October 7, 2012.